Hi, welcome to Off Script. I'm Zach Lewis.
And I'm Dr. Draper.
Today on the show, we're taking a look at Sony and Marvel's Madam Web. Boy, oh boy, the film is out. Reviews are out too, so I don't know if I have to tell you whether or not it's good or bad, but is it so bad it's good? The big question everybody's got on the internet. We've watched the film. We have the answers. We're also going to take a look at American Fiction. Best Picture nominee this year, that very few people are talking about. We had a couple of screenings here in Dallas. I managed to sneak away and catch one, so we're going to talk about that movie. And we're going to talk about Netflix's Nyad. Also, a couple of Oscar nominees in here, Annette Bening and Jodie Foster, notably. This is a Netflix feature. Andy took a look at it. We're going to talk about what's going on. I want to have a larger conversation about what exactly is happening in Madam Web in our Death of Cinema segment. Before we get to all of that, we need to talk about the news. Our first story this week, Andy, Marvel has a Fantastic Four cast. I don't believe it. Finally, the Fantastic Four have been announced. Who are our four mighty heroes? Who do we got? Who's on deck?
Probably the worst kept secret in Hollywood. We found out, or there were rumors of this cast back in the fall in November. So it's not exactly a huge surprise, but it is nice to finally get confirmation. We have Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards, Vanessa Kirby as Sue Storm, newcomer Joseph Quinn, who I am not super familiar with. He's going to be the Human Torch, Johnny Storm, and cousin, who you might recognize from the show The Bear, Eben Moss Bachrach, as Ben Grimm, or better known as The Thing. So we have our Fantastic Four cast. This movie is slated for July of 2025. Script and director are already finalized. They're going to get production underway soon. We'll see if it actually comes out, because it's going to be going up against the likes of things like Superman Legacy from James Gunn. So exciting news in the comic book world.
Andy's right. We reported on this a while back. It is not a well-kept secret, but now it's officially been formalized via tweet from @Marvel on Valentine's Day when they released some art. We got it up on screen if you're watching the live right now, with our Fantastic Four cast all together, having a little party in what appears to be a 1960s setting, with a cute portrait of OG Ben Grimm in the background. Ebon Moss-Bachrach is an astronaut, and this little gizmo R2-D2 looking droid helper that's handing the Thing a cup of coffee. It looks like it might be a retro feature, a nostalgia feature, right? 1960s, I think people are talking about, which I'm going to be honest, couching the Fantastic Four in a retro film might be a good way to help the medicine go down, right, Andy? What do you think? I think it's a sharp approach.
It tells us a lot. It means that this may not really tie into the modern MCU if it's taking place in the 60s. I think that's one big signifier. It will be interesting to have a period piece. We've seen this done before with things like X-Men First Class, which kind of takes place in the 60s. It's an interesting approach. I dig it. It really depends on things like what's the look, what's the tone, what's the story, who's going to play Doom. Is Doom going to be the big villain? Probably not. A lot of these movies have an annoying thing of where you start out with a mid-level villain, and then you tease the big, it's like the Joker at the end of Batman Begins. You tease the Joker for the second movie. You don't put him in the first movie.
Yeah, I don't know who the bad guy is going to be. We don't even know for sure that it's going to be set in the 60s. That's no sort of formal announcement, but it's got people talking. I think it's a clever way to at least market it. And for what it's for what it is, I think the cast is fine. I don't have any real complaints. Newcomer, what's his name? From
Joseph Quinn.
Joseph Quinn as Johnny Storm. He is in Stranger Things. He's Eddie Munson in season 4, right? The Hellfire Club. That's where he's from. Andy didn't watch the new season of Stranger Things, so he doesn't know. And if you haven't watched Hulu's The Bear,
Yawn.
Well, all right. If you haven't watched Hulu's The Bear, Emmy award-winning show, you would not know Emmy award winner Ebon Moss-Bachrach either. He's got those bright blue eyes. That's what Christopher Nolan liked about Cillian Murphy all those years. Got striking blue eyes that'll come off great in whatever suit he's in. And also goes alongside Vanessa Kirby, right, who I think is probably a really great pick as Sue Storm. She's talked about wanting to do Sue Storm in the past on red carpets, so she nailed that. I think getting Pedro Pascal in while he's hot is smart. I don't know. By the way, somebody mentioned this. Pedro Pascal, when is he shooting The Mandalorian? Odd question, but like he's got to do the last of season 2 and he's doing this. So somebody pointed out, I'm pretty sure there's like 2 or 3 stunt doubles for the Mandalorian. How much of that show is actually him in the suit now, you think? I bet it's maybe 30%. I bet it's just a stand-in. Gotta be. There's no way he's on set. He's got other things to shoot. He's got to do face rolls now. Like he's got to be the face of Disney.
Well, season 4 is going to be, I guess, the Mandalorian movies, which is in 2026. So I guess he's still got time.
He'll be on some of that. Yeah.
You know that he's got to have the helmet off, so he's going to have to be. They're going to get him on set for a lot of that movie, I think.
He will be on for a half day. They'll have him in, and then he'll come do a day of voiceover over Zoom, and that'll be his role. No, I'm sure he'll be fine in The Mandalorian, and I'm sure Fantastic Four will be good. More on this as it develops here on Off Script Film Review. Our next story this week, this came out today. Sam Mendes is making 4 separate Beatles movies. I think this is not going to happen. I think this is the most bonkers Beatlemania idea I've ever heard. This is coming from Apple and I think Sony. Yes, announced this, that in 2027, Sam Mendes is going to release 4 different films all about each individual Beatle: John, Paul, George, and Ringo, not necessarily in that order. Who is going to go see 4 Beatles movies in 2027, Andy? Who cares, right? What am I missing here? Am I taking crazy pills?
I mean, the Beatles are still such a huge influence culturally, globally. I think there's a lot of fans. I think the risky part here is, 4 films in 1 year. That's that's basically TV is what you're doing. You're doing 8 episodes of a TV show. Like film is getting more and more serialized. It's going to be tough to see if you can get audiences to all 4 movies. It is a cool idea. It's also 3 years away. It's not going to come out until 2027. A lot can happen. A lot can go wrong. We talk all the time about shifting dates and things like that. Like, it's a long way out to call your shot. So I don't know if this is actually going to happen. It seems like too big of an undertaking in how volatile the Hollywood system is.
Yeah, Sony spoke on kind of the nature of this project. They said, quote, "We intended this to be a uniquely thrilling and epic cinematic experience. 4 films told from 4 different perspectives, which tell a single story about the most celebrated band of all time." Look, I love the Beatles, and I know they're getting a lot of buzz. They got that new track come out, right? That new single that Peter Jackson worked out with John Lennon's vocals. They had Get Back, the Peter Jackson project with Disney. They just had that song in Argyle, which, I guess is big for a $200 million feature. But now we've got 4 music biopics that all tell the story of 1 music biopic. It's like, I don't even know if people care enough. But the thing that surprised me most is a statement from director Sam Mendes, director of American Beauty, 1917, Skyfall, Spectre, Road to Perdition. He said, quote, "I'm honored to be telling the story of the greatest rock band of all time and excited to challenge the notion of what constitutes a trip to the movies." Like, they're talking about it like it's not just one film. Like, challenge the notion of what constitutes a trip to the movies. What does that mean? Is this a mini series? Like, why would I go see all of these? And Ringo's got to be last, right? Or maybe like second. They'll do John or
Third.
Paul first. Like, they'll probably do our boy George at the end, which is dirty, but it's fine. I just
no. You got to go.
Am
out
I
with
wrong
a
for being
bang.
a skeptic about this? What do you think?
You're going to start with Paul and you're going to end with John, because you got to start strong and end strong. Who knows where Ringo goes?
I figured you'd do John. Yeah, all right, go ahead.
I don't know how much. Again, is everyone going to go to the first movie and not the other 3? This sounds more like it should be something that comes out on streaming, honestly.
Yeah, it really does. It's a surprise. It's odd.
But again, Apple owns the rights to the Beatles music, and so this is something they'll put on their streaming service, and so that's another reason it can be odd and different and 8 hours long, because things can be however long they need to be on streaming.
Yeah, it's we keep it here for more on this. Like I said, it sounds like such a fantastic project. Like, it's not going to happen. Like, it sounds like a pie in the sky idea. I'm surprised they've got a quote from Sam on it. Whatever. Hey, whatever. They got it locked down. 4 Beatles films coming soon, I guess. Keep it here on Off Script for more. For something a bit more grounded, all right, a bit less absurd, our boy Luc Besson is directing a Dracula feature, right? A director of Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, The Fifth Element, right? Fantastical features taking us to foreign planets, alien worlds where anything can happen. Sci-fi greats is now diving into the Gothic with a Dracula adaptation. What do you know about this, Andy?
So Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is kind of one of the definitive tellings of that story, was made in 1992 with fantastic cast, Anthony Hopkins, almost said Keira Knightley, not Keira Knightley, who's the 90s version. I'm blanking. Keanu Reeves is in it. It's fantastic telling of Dracula. And in this version, he's Prince Vladimir, who is smited by, or he perceives he's been smitten by God. His love interest dies. He curses God and signs a pact with the devil, becomes Dracula, and then kind of not teleports, but 400 years later, he thinks he sees her again in London. He, kind of dooms himself. The 1992 Bram Stoker, the Francis Ford Coppola, is insane. Like, it is so crazy, and I can't even imagine being in a theater in 1992 and seeing this thing. We've reviewed it for the show. It's nice to see this being made again. It's definitely been long enough. And Dracula has a weird copyright thing to it. You just can't call something Dracula because that's copywritten by someone else. But Bram Stoker's Dracula is the name of the book, the title, and so you can kind of get away with it. I'm excited about this. I love this property, and but it's a high bar to see because then that 1992 version is crazy.
Yeah, if you have the means, let me just speak as an OG Bram Stoker's Dracula hater or Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula hater. If you have the means, go see that in a theater. I know you're thinking, when is that going to come to a theater? I thought the same thing. A local theater of ours at a retro screening, we went and saw it, completely changed my opinion on that movie. If you have the means, go get swallowed by a screen running Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's a treat. As for Luc Besson's Dracula, we'll see, man. His last movie, Dog Man, made $3 million in France and got mixed reviews, with Variety calling it a ludicrous howler and, quote, an irredeemably boneheaded thriller. That also starred Caleb Landry. We'll see. We'll see. I don't know. I think people like to think of the most fantastic elements of his work as the things that really stand out. Obviously, there's a lot of potential with something like Dracula, and Christoph Waltz is a great time. I wouldn't mind seeing him take on the big man with the fangs. We'll just have to see, I guess. One more story. Go ahead.
Real quick before we move on, I want to get the cast right of that 1992 version that starred Gary Oldman as Dracula in this incredible makeup. Winona Ryder, Anthony Hopkins, Keanu Reeves, Richard E. Grant, Cary Elwes, Tom Waits, Monica Bellucci. Like, it's an amazing cast. I encourage you to watch it. Keanu Reeves has not only the worst haircut, but the worst English accent you've ever heard.
Oceans of Time. Oceans of Time for you. It's my best. It's the best Oldman I got. One more story this week. From the box office, Bob Marley One Love opens with $52 million, while Madam Web wipes out. Oh, no. We're going to talk about Madam Web in just a second real quick. But speaking of me, dumbing down music biopics, just a couple stories ago about the Beatles. Turns out Bob Marley One Love ain't doing too bad. Right, Andy?
Yeah, it came in the weekend at 50 million, 80 million globally. This is like double what they thought it was going to make. They thought it might come in like the 20 to $30 million range. So it's doing really good. This biopic, like, it doesn't look like a great movie to me, and it has not been reviewed well at all by critics. Huge hit, which just goes to show no one knows anything in Hollywood. You never know what's going to hit and connect with audiences. But it's doing really well. And these music biopics, like, we complain that they keep getting made because they're kind of formulaic and cheesy, but they're successful. And that's why we're going to be getting things like the new upcoming Amy Winehouse biopic, which comes out in May. Like, they're going to keep making them because people keep going.
I know. Bob Marley One Love doing well and Madam Web doing poorly is a great reminder that film Twitter is not a real place and does not represent the will of the people. And just because the memes you see on there make it seem really like one thing will do good or bad, obviously is no indication of what will happen. Bit of a surprise out of the box office, but, also not bad. Like, I hear our man Ben Kingsley Adir is excellent in the feature. He certainly looks good in the trailers. And while we haven't had time to get around and see it, mostly because, I'll be honest, we're a little burnt on music biopics over here. I would probably get around to watching this at some point, and if we do, we'll cover it here on the show. For now, we didn't get to it. It's okay, though. I'm sure we'll be around. Oh, God, I don't know if we're going to go see that Amy Winehouse feature either. Maybe we'll go see the 4 Beatles movies from Sam Mendes in 2027. Maybe we'll go do that.
I did want to also comment that Wonka has passed 600 million globally, over $500 million on the Wonka film, which, as predicted by me on Off Script, was going to be a huge hit. So Timothy Chalamet, you can bank on him, and that's also a musical film. But it was a 4-quadrant thing. It was family friendly. It came in at the holidays, so $600 million. That's huge for that kind of movie.
Andy's right. He called that one way early. Even I didn't think Wonka was going to do that good. I thought it was going to be a bomb, but here we are. It's killing it. Worth mentioning, it helps when your film is in theaters for a quarter of a year. I told Christine you could still get Wonka tickets today. She was like, didn't we see that in early December? Yes, that's when it came out. It's late February, and it's still available. But hey, you know what? Speaks to the power of the box office, baby. I bet Tom Cruise wishes he could get the same play out of his 90-day windows, but that's what it is. I wonder if Dune won't run for 90 days, will it? Maybe.
I mean, we'll see what the people might be all about the IMAX.
You know, I heard Dune was estimated for like a $60 to $80 million opening, but there's some bullish folks out there saying it might go as high as 90. What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, I think it could be in that 90 to 100 range. A lot of times Hollywood's either overestimating or kind of underestimating things. Usually they do a little bit too much overestimating. But occasionally, it's like Barbie knocked it out. It made like $30 million more than they had thought. So I think this is one. There's zero competition. The movies we're in that era, that time of the year where there's just not much on, not a lot of strong February releases. You got Oscar stuff out that on VOD. We're not quite to summer yet, so Dune will go in unopposed, and it's kind of an event thing, so it could be huge.
I am so excited that every once in a while we get such a brilliant segue on this show that I could take advantage of. But there is no better film to talk about Hollywood overestimating itself in 2024 than this next feature. I'm so looking forward to talking about this with all of you, especially after having to spend the time to watch it. Andy's going to be taking the review on this one. So Andy, please take it away.
Madam Web. The long-anticipated and highly memed comic book property, Madam Web. This is a Spider-Man adjacent property. Is a character from the 80s that kind of is a clairvoyant and has a team of spider people that she works with. This film adaptation is a little bit different. It stars Dakota Johnson as Cassandra Webb. She is a paramedic living in New York. She's a very cynical person. She doesn't really have family or friends. She's kind of dark to be around, a little bit of a downer. One day, when she's out of work, she is involved in an accident and is thrown into the river, nearly drowns, is brought back to the life by one Ben Parker. Yes, Uncle Ben from the Spider-Man universe, played by Adam Scott. And after this accident, after she kind of dies and comes back, is revived, things are different. Things aren't quite the same. And she starts to relive moments in her life, and she realizes that she's seeing the future, but only a little bit, and only a little bit at a time. She might see 5 minutes into the future, and she tries to kind of change some things and isn't really able to make much difference, but that starts to improve. One day when she walks on the train, she first sees a bad agent killing four girls on the train, and she's able to not stop him, but able to get these girls off the train, and has to help them, has to learn to control these new powers that she has, and kind of uncover the secret of her family and where the spider powers come from, while also playing babysitter to these four potential spider people, one of which is of course Sydney Sweeney, who's larger than life right now. So that's our setup. It's really complicated, a lot going on. We got a lot to talk about with this movie. Zach, what do you think of Madame Web?
I would love to get on here and just say right on the top that Madam Web is a so bad it's good feature. I really would, but I am not a big purveyor of so bad it's good cinema. And I'm gonna be honest, man, I struggled with this movie. Like, there's bits I think that are so bad it's good, but overall I think it's just so bad it's bad. There is nothing redeemable in the way of this being a good fun feature. In my opinion, it is bad all over. The only redeeming quality is if it goes so far over the top cop to be bad, that you throw it on during like a party with your friends, a kickback as it were, and you hang out and have fun and you laugh at all the goofy stuff. But let me remind you, for those of you who believe you are cynical enough, strong enough, wise enough to laugh at the ironic here, to jeer at the things that do not work, let me remind you, this is a 2-hour feature, and it is a slog in its most boring moments to get through. They try to edit around it. They try to hit you with jump scares and goofy things to make it exciting. It doesn't work. Abandon all hope, ye who enter Madam Web. It is bad from start to finish, and I'm so looking forward to talking about it because I want to talk about the movie, and then we're going to talk about how this happened and why Sony made this way. And it's just going to be a nuanced conversation I'm excited to have. So Andy, where do we get started? Do we start with performances, tone, story, general direction? I mean, what the hell happened here?
So I will first off come out and I agree. It is kind of a disaster in a lot of ways. I still had a lot of fun and I laughed through it. It's definitely has lots of so bad it's a good moment. Some of it is. I mean, it's like 2 of these in a row because we watched Argyle. I would say this is better than Argyle, or at least more enjoyable than Argyle. Like I would rewatch Madam Web even as a joke. I would never put anyone through Argyle. It's got lots of problems from writing to acting to effects to just kind of the whole concept. But at the same time, there's parts where they clearly spent the money. Like there's some like big stunts and like what is a lot of CGI. But but somehow it's an expensive steaming pile. So Zach, why don't we start with the story, the plot? That seems to be one of the biggest issues with it.
Yeah, well, I think part of the issue is kind of this overarching idea that we're going to keep making Spider-Man adjacent movies without Spider-Man in it. We're going to talk a bit more about Sony and Marvel's relationship and why that is in just a few minutes. But before we get there, Sony is just continuing to churn out these films that are in the Spider-Verse or Spider-Man adjacent, but don't have Spider-Man in them. They have imagery. They've got Venom, right? And Morbius is one of these entries. And now Madam Web is here. And then soon to follow this is Kraven the Hunter, starring Aaron Taylor Johnson. All of these movies are starting to follow a very similar format, which is you have your average protagonist, we'll say, because they're not necessarily heroes in all cases, but you have your average protagonist. They live in the city. Something happens to them and their life changes. They have a brief second act with some goofy action. And then in the third act, they kind of acquire some kind of responsibility of power and then resolve to not fight Spider-Man. But that's probably where it's headed because we're all adults and have to buy our movie tickets and go into the theater and we understand what this is, right? And like this being kind of the third pass at this now, if you consider Venom 2, like it's particularly rote. Not to mention this is coming in the back end of dozens of comic book features that are all starting to feel very samey. So you got a movie that does not feel like anything new and does not feel like anything different. And tragically, it doesn't really do anything interesting with its cast either, which should be good. On IMDb, this cast reads great. Dakota Johnson was excellent in Suspiria. Sydney Sweeney is one of the hottest up-and-comers around. Nobody is talking about their performances in these features. Like, they're not great. And those are just the ones that are notable, right? Adam Scott's a lot of fun. There's a couple of the cast of girls in here that would be interesting, but they don't do a whole lot. I don't know.
So that is one of the big criticisms is the marketing has all these things about Madam Web and then like the other women who are kind of like these Spider Girls. This is Sydney Sweeney's character, or Isabella Merced and Celeste O'Connor, who she ends up kind of having to babysit. Like she rescues them from getting killed on the train, and then she just kind of has to deal with them. But they're just teenagers, and like they're not actually in spoilers. They never get in the suits the entire movie. It's kind of flashbacks or flash forwards, or visions rather. So like our 3 Spider Women that we see in all the marketing, nowhere actually on screen. And like they don't have powers. They're just kind of annoying teenagers. They do kind of like, just work together, discover the power of family and friendship to overcome all obstacles, that whole sort of thing. I did think that the overall picture of this is good. Like the ideas, like if you were to write an outline of what's going on, it's some strong ideas, but the execution is so terrible
Yeah.
Particularly a lot of stuff in Peru.
There's this really funny mechanic that the movie does. These like kind of flash forward dream sequence things that Madame Webb starts experiencing after this particular harrowing incident towards the end of the first act. She starts to have these like flashes of like an alternate timeline, an alternate reality, the future, maybe the past, right? Where she can see ahead kind of, but she can't really control it. And these sequences are so choppily edited, like, and so loud, and often kicked off with some kind of jump scare, like just a gunshot in the middle of a scene. They just happen when the movie gets boring. Like, as soon as things start to slow down a little bit, bang, and we're in the middle of like the flashiest, loudest sequence you've ever seen in a theater for no good reason. And it really does remind me of like Orson Welles putting a parrot in Citizen Kane, not with any kind of flair, just to like wake people up and be like, oh God, the movie got boring. Here's where test audiences said the movie got boring. We better edit in a sequence here and make this exciting. A lot of this feels like it was pulled together by test audience screenings. Like, well, we showed this to a bunch of people in Arizona and they hated it. What could we do? They said the third act was slow. Let's tighten this up. It ends up feeling like a movie made by committee. It feels like a movie made by AI. And I know Dakota Johnson made that comment on SNL, a movie AI would make for your boyfriend to watch or something like that. She's been running entire smear campaign on this film.
Anti-PR campaign.
Yes, ever since she dumped her talent agency the week after the trailer dropped, and since has been doing everything she can to functionally distance herself creatively. It's really odd. Like it seems like the stars know it's bad. It seems like Sony knows it's bad. Everybody knows it's bad, but they also spent $80 million on it, which, by the way, Variety was reporting that sells closer to $100 million, but we're not sure. That's before marketing. So they got to get their money back, right? They got to do something with it. Here we are. We're just going to kind of just drop this in theaters in February and hope for the best.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of where to go. So some of the action is really good. Like actually some of the practical effects, like there's a lot of car crashes in this. Those are some good, like there's some stunt driving going on. You can see where the money went. And then there's some absolutely atrocious CGI and animation. Some stuff, I mean, a little bit like last week's Argyle, where I couldn't believe what I was seeing on screen was so bad, like both in concept and execution. And there's some of that here as well, where you're seeing, I mean, just some of the action looks really bad, but a lot of like the more superhero looking stuff looks terrible. One of Madame Webb's powers in the comic books is that she can kind of astral project, and you're like, they're not going to do that. That would be dumb. Well, they kind of do, and it looks as terrible as you might think, and it's as ineffective, and like it's supposed to be kind of the climactic part, and it's like the opposite. You get the opposite effect. So a lot of the effects look really bad, but half of it looks fine, looks pretty good. So it's bizarre how the money was spent.
Yeah. One of my favorite techniques this film uses a lot of, particularly in and out of scene transitions or in action, is rolling the camera. And not like just rolling film through the camera, like physically rolling the camera 360 degrees. It happens a lot. Director S.J. Clarkson seems to love this move. And while there's a lot going on with this film, I do want to mention Director Clarkson. Seems to have done a lot of TV, which some of it's bad, but also some of it's good. They directed an episode of Succession, HBO show, which I love. Like, seems to be a little hit and miss. And I understand you've got to make a movie inside the studio system. You've got to make a comic book film that satisfies Sony and Marvel. And again, test audiences. I have no doubt that's not an easy job, but it just feels like there was a lot that went wrong. The audio is particularly clumsy, notably with our antagonist, Tahir Rahim, who I swear to God, 90% of their lines are ADR'd. I don't know why. I don't know why. It is the most baffling thing on watch. Like, I had heard it, and then I went and saw the film and couldn't believe they almost never speak on screen, and when they do, it's ADR'd. It is the oddest thing. They've got a weird accent. Sydney Sweeney is supposed to be a teenager. She very much doesn't look like one. Dakota Johnson, for what it's worth, by the way, one more thing, I do want to say, she does take a swing at some lines creatively. I think a few of them do, because they probably realize just how bad this was. So there are some good line reads, and those are going to be the things you laugh at, right? Those are the things you laugh at, ironically, because it's funny that it's this bad. But the stuff you won't laugh at is the genuine boring bits, which I think are a lot of what's happening here. I think it's more than like the good. It's more than the so bad it's good. And that's ultimately like where I end up on it. But boy, I sure have seen a lot of people saying this might be a new cult classic, right? This might be a new hang out, watch with your friends film. What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I saw it with a pretty full theater. People seem to be enjoying it. There's a lot of things that are funny, both intentionally and unintentionally. One thing I wanted to point out is this takes place in 2003, and the reason it does is that it's a little bit of a prequel to the Spider-Man universe, and the idea was that this was going to line up with Tom Holland's Spider-Man, maybe Spider-Man 4, and so they need all these characters to be like. That's why Sydney Sweeney is supposed to be like a young teenager, so that she can play like adult Sydney Sweeney in like whatever this Spider-Man thing is. So that's because it was originally going to take place in the 90s. So, but then that would have it lining up with the Andrew Garfield Amazing Spider-Man movies from the 2010s. So they bumped it up to the next decade. That's probably not going to happen at this rate. So again, it's kind of a victim of the studio system where a bunch of suits and bean counters and execs are like, all right, we got to have an explosion here. This has got to happen here. This has got to tie up. This has got to kick off 10 new films. And it's just executive to death. And we kind of get this huge mishmash.
Well, I really want to talk about Sony and Marvel's relationship and our Death of Cinema segment here in just a moment. So before we get there, I've got to know, Andy, to wrap up our Madam Web discussion, would you recommend Madam Web?
I would recommend it to fans of Spider-Man comic book movies. If you're really big into those, I think you'll still enjoy it. It's got it follows a lot of the same beats. It has some good moments. It has a lot of cringe and embarrassing and funny moments. It does kind of get into that so bad it's good. If you're curious, maybe save it for streaming. If all of this sounds horrific to you, I would say probably pass.
I am kind of not in the so bad it's good camp over here. I think I'm just going to say pass all around. I think there are people out there who really do like what's happening here. They see this as like art irony and they really get a kick out of it. But I think if you're going to get maximum value, you have to be a really particular sort of cynic. And those people are out there, like for sure. I know we have people listen to this show who love this kind of stuff. And if you really like it, I'd say go in, you're going to have a good time. Otherwise, like, dude, there's so much better cinema out there. There's so many better ways to spend 2 hours than in Madam Web. Because in those moments when you're not laughing, in those moments when you're watching and thinking, this is really bad. People weren't kidding. Like it is, man. It's real bad. And I'm looking forward to talking about how this happened and if Sony's going to recoup their losses and if there's any way this thing makes its money back in our Death of Cinema segment. So, Andy, would you mind bringing us in, please?
It's time for the Death of Cinema. So we're going to continue our discussion on Madam Web. Hollywood Reporter has this great article out, Inside Madam Web's Collapse, Forget About a New Franchise. So like I said before, Madam Web was supposed to kick off a series of new Spider films. You have these 3 Spider women that are teased in this movie. There were supposed to be more films about them. Eventually, it was supposed to all catch up to, I think, a Tom Holland Spider-Man. So it's real bad. And this is how bad it was. There's this great quote that on Wednesday night when this came out, people that had bought advance tickets for like Friday and Saturday were immediately asking for refunds because the reviews and the word of mouth was so bad. And you could look in real time and just see the ticket numbers crashing. And it really says something when you'd rather have Shazam 2 numbers. I mean, as much of a joke as Morbius was for several years, Morbius did way better in its run. Like, this is a new level of bad. Even for Sony, who has found success with the Venom movies and kind of doing the slapstick kind of cheap version of comic book films, and it just did not work for this. It's been a disaster. Dakota Johnson has been on an anti-PR campaign. She mentions doing a bunch of stuff on blue screen where they're like, just imagine an explosion here and an explosion here, and she was like, this is psychotic. I don't know what this is going to look like, and she's never made a film that way before. So it's bad all around. Zach, what are some of your initial thoughts here?
Well, I love this quote from this industry veteran here, unnamed by Hollywood Reporter, but I appreciate them weighing in. They said, quote, "We're not going to see another Madam Web movie for another decade plus. It failed. Sony tried to make a movie that was a different type of superhero movie." And that it seems a little confusing because I just got off my rant saying this feels the same as every other movie because it does. Like, and the things that are different are A, it's a primarily female cast, and B, they don't suit up. Andy's right. Like, this is more like Leigh Whannell's The Invisible Man from a couple years ago with Elizabeth. I forget her name.
Moss.
When like she doesn't actually like become any kind of anything till really the end of the feature. Like up before that, it's a bit more of a grounded suspense thriller. At least that's what they're going for. But I don't believe that's what's failing here. I really don't. I think the marketing sells this as a Spider-Man oriented feature. Like the trailers all point to this is a superhero movie. They've got super suits in them. They got Dakota Johnson in suit on the side of a Burger King cup. Like, I really don't think that's what's hurting here. I think it's primarily fatigue, man. I really do. And especially, like a lot of people are pointing out on Twitter, there's no Spider-Man. And it's becoming increasingly obvious as we get to more and more obscure heroes around a villain that's notably missing here. What everybody wants is Spider-Man. So what I wanted to ask you, Andy, if you can explain for me and the people in the back, what is Marvel's relationship with Sony around Spider-Man? And why is Sony continuing to make these spin-off features, and why does Marvel have to keep coordinating with them? Who owns what? How does this happen?
So Disney owns Marvel, all of Marvel, like the comics, the films. In the late 90s, Marvel was going bankrupt and started selling off its properties. But Sony very wisely bought the film rights to Spider-Man. And that's where we got the Tobey Maguire 2002 version of that film, which was a huge hit and essentially kicked off the superhero renaissance that we've been in for the last 20 years. So Sony owns just the film rights to Spider-Man, and the thing is they have to keep making Spider-Man movies or those rights will revert back to Disney Marvel. And so that's why every like 5 to 7 years we get a new Spider-Man movie. You know, after the Tobey Maguire ones, we got the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies and then Tom Holland. So they have to keep making these and making side projects. And that's why they keep doing this, why they keep doing, because that's basically all Sony has. They don't have any other of the properties. And so that's why we keep getting this. And, you know, Marvel, Disney, they would love to own Spider-Man film rights, but they don't. And so that's why we keep getting these.
Yeah, and it's a weird relationship, too, because the Tom Holland Spider-Man films have been so successful. Oh my God, over the top successful. I remember going to the theater for that last Tom Holland Spider-Man film and just seeing the parking lot, how many people were in the theater for Homecoming after, it's the last one, Homecoming. I think. After COVID, like seeing how full that parking lot was like, oh my God, movies are back, baby. Like we're here. Everybody's coming out for Spider-Man. Insane. It is an undeniably fruitful relationship. And while Disney has quite the war chest, it's not exactly cheap to buy Sony, or at least buy Spider-Man out from Sony. They're not going to let it go. So in the meantime, they functionally have to play ball here because Sony's going to keep making them, it seems. And there's not a whole lot that Marvel can do about it. But the funny thing is, it seems like if anybody's brand is really getting hurt here, it's Marvel, because Marvel is just comic book movies. Sony does all kinds of other stuff. And I know Marvel is owned by Disney, but still, like, you make 5 bad comic book movies and 1 good comic book movie, people are not going to have a generally glowing review of comic book films. And if Sony just keeps cranking out worse and worse features, this one topping out at a bold 13% on Rotten Tomatoes to critic scores, like, it's just going to keep poisoning the well. You know what I mean? Like, it only stands to hurt Marvel more. Do you think, I guess, curiously, Andy, does Marvel have any creative say? Like, can they do anything here? Or is it just like, nah, they can just keep making whatever they want, and as long as people keep turning out?
I mean, pretty much outside of, they collaborated on when Spider-Man was in those Phase 3 movies of the MCU, starting with Civil War and then Endgame. the Infinity Saga, those. And there are actually a lot of stipulations. I've read part of the contract before, and it's very specifically the way like Peter Parker has to be named, how he has to be portrayed, how he can't be portrayed. Like it's very specific. So there are things that they have to stick to, but Sony owns the rights, so they can kind of do what they want. But they also need to start making better movies. They're just contributing to kind of the end of the superhero heyday.
Yeah, it sure seems like it. One thing's for sure, I don't think we're going to see any more Madam Web features. At least I can't imagine Dakota Johnson is back for even a cameo unless she's getting a fat paycheck. Meanwhile, Sydney Sweeney showing up in a Tom Holland feature is more than possible. Obviously, she's got some heat right now, and it seems like Sony wants another one of these features out. I was reading they're trying to push for a new Spider-Man film as early as 2025, and Kevin Feige at Marvel is like desperately trying to get them to hold off because they would have to pivot a lot of their strategy around how that works. Remember, Marvel had big pivots for that Doctor Strange movie because of Spider-Man. They went and did reshoots. They had to pivot Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness to be after Spider-Man. America Chavez is supposed to be more involved in that film. And instead, she had a weird role in Doctor Strange because of that. Like, there's a whole content creation strategy that functionally revolves around this arm of creative that Marvel can't really do anything about. And in the meantime, it just seems to keep getting worse and worse. But obviously, Sony has taken a hit with Madam Web. They are not seeming to make the money back, and that's bad. If Kraven the Hunter underperforms, what do you think, Andy? Do we see a pause? Do we see a rush for new Spider-Man? I mean, I don't see them slowing down anytime, right? Why would they? But
I think Madam Web in its failure they're going to pivot. They got to pivot to something. They got to do something different because, again, they had like 5 more films planned or whatever, however many in the franchise. And since none of that's going to happen, they got to come up with something new or pivot their existing ideas. It was supposed to maybe build up to some sort of Sinister Six thing. That's the problem with comic book movies when you need to string together like 5 or 6 of them. It's like anything goes wrong anywhere in that sequence and you're kind of screwed. And that was kind of the beauty of Marvel phase 1 through 3 is that somehow they just could not miss, and they didn't have anyone die or anyone just quit being a superhero. They managed to keep the whole cast for like 11 years. It was an incredible thing that they did what they did. And we're seeing how hard it is to recreate that. Even like you got to have a hit. Every movie's got a hit, and you got to have things not go wrong with production and cast and all that. And it's very, very difficult to recreate.
Well, I can't really speak for what Sony's doing next, but we do have some ideas of where Disney is headed. Bob Iger said at the last Disney D23, Disney Investors Call, some big thing recently. They said that they are looking to scale it back. They're going to do less Marvel movies. They want them to be higher quality. So I can appreciate, at least on the Marvel side, they are looking ahead and trying to pivot. As for Sony, I guess we'll see. Like I said, they got Kraven the Hunter coming out. Maybe that'll have the meme magic. Aaron Taylor Johnson might put it over the top. I'm not so sure. I definitely know there's some sequences in the Amazon in there. There's like dudes hunting in the jungle. It's like, oh God, they shoot this like they're all shooting on the same backlot as Madam Web. They have to be.
Yeah, I was gonna say you got to cut the Madam Web post-credit scene. No.
Right. My God. So yeah, that's where I'm at. Any other thoughts on this for American Fiction, Andy?
I just also wanted to mention that Dakota Johnson had said that she read a very different script initially. Apparently, it originally had some sort of kind of Terminator vibe where the bad guy was after Mary Parker, a pregnant Mary Parker, who's Peter Parker's mother, and she and her Spider Clan were going to have to protect her from the bad guy, reminiscent of James Cameron's Terminator movie and Sarah Connor and all that. So like none of that is what happens on screen or what we see in this movie. But it seems like what Dakota Johnson was pitched, the script she read was wildly different than what we ended up with.
Yeah. And I guess that's the way it goes in Hollywood. I remember not long ago, there was an interview with Adam Driver talking about Silent Island for Kylo Ren for Star Wars. And he said he didn't even get a script. They were like, you just have to agree to it on the front. We're gonna pitch this to you, and if you want it, here's the check, and then you're getting a script, which is insane. I think this kind of stuff gives actors more clout. I really do. I think this kind of stuff steps actors forward in the space of understanding that these projects maybe are a little bit more about making money and a little bit less about like creative opportunity. It's a shame that seems to be the case. I hope that doesn't continue, because I don't think it will help at the box office, any comic book movies going forward. Hopefully we get some smarter auteurs behind the camera, or at least some smarter executives who know where to spend their money a little bit better, because Madam Web, it's not, I mean, it's not forgettable. Credit where it's due, right? I won't forget it for a while. And hey, if there's anything you don't want to be in the film industry, it's forgettable. But speaking of things that are unforgettable, I'm really looking forward to talking about this next feature. It's going to be a mini review, because I'm the only one that's seen it. Like I said, we had some weird Showtime opportunities for it, but I'm looking forward to getting into it. Please excuse my clumsy delivery. The film is American Fiction. So, American Fiction is the story of Thelonious Ellison, a black writer who is frustrated with the state of African-American literature. It's a modern story. Thelonious is a writer who's written a few novels that isn't getting really any recognition, and meanwhile he's having some struggles at home. His mom is losing her memory, and his brother is disparate and has his own family troubles across the country and doesn't talk to him. And his sister, meanwhile, is trying to take care of mom. And on top of all that, upon going to a book signing one day, he realizes that nobody is coming to check out his books. Nobody wants to keep up with what Thelonious Ellison is doing. So he goes across the street where he sees Issa Rae playing a character, Santara Golden, who's just written a black novel called We Lives in the Ghetto. She does a reading, and it is the most, to him, stereotypical black story, full of racial stereotypes that people just seem to eat up. It's a bestseller, right? People love it. White culture loves it. They feel like it fits into everything that they believe black culture to be, and he can't stand it. So, in need of funds and struggling at home, one night he pens a novel, or I guess an early draft, called My Pathology, under the ghostwriter named Stag R. Lee. And he sends it to his publicist, and his publicist sends it out, and it immediately becomes a hit. White publicists everywhere grab it, and they want to sign a Hollywood deal, and they want to make it this huge thing and order 1 million copies, and it becomes what's supposed to be his most successful work. And suddenly, our lead, Thelonious, begins to become everything he disdains in writing. Thelonious is played brilliantly by Jeffrey Wright. It's a fantastic cast all around. Film's directed by Cord Jefferson, and it is an adaptation of a book, and I feel terrible that I can't recall what exactly that book title is, but I will get it in just a second. In the meantime, like I said, I'm the only one that managed to go see this because we had some weird screening times, but notably what I wanted to say is this film is nominated for a few Academy Awards, notably Best Picture and Best Score, which is an understated score, and our only female composer. Really good stuff. Actually worth mentioning. A lot of jazz, a lot of piano, very freewheeling. But it's odd because it's a very dry film, very dry humor, and about a very challenging time in somebody's life when their family, their parent is losing their memory, right? And you have to learn how to take them to living in some kind of like full-time senior assisted living center. And you have to coordinate with your siblings about how that's going to work and who's going to pay for it. And you have to take time away from your life to take care of others. And it ends up being a much larger story than what's in the trailer, which on its face totally just looks like a fun story about a writer who gets frustrated and writes a novel that completely misrepresents them and ends up having a lot of success with it, and then being kind of hanging on to that comet by the tail for as long as they can until ideally it all blows up in their face. I don't want to say it's underrepresented in the trailer, but like I said, it's like it shows 30 or 40% of the movie. All the family stuff is left out on the back end. And being a 2-hour feature, that's most of your runtime. And while it's meaningful, it ends up feeling a lot like two almost separate films. It's like whimsical fun bit about the publishing industry and the struggles of writing and visualizing characters in front of you. And then also like really struggling with the stage of life that not a lot of people talk about. It's uniquely intelligent and uniquely adult and uniquely human. And that's really unique. And I'm really glad I got to go see it. So I did want to mention a bit of the cast in here, but while I catch my breath, Andy, any questions, any thoughts on American Fiction?
So I know that Sterling K. Brown is nominated for Best Supporting Actor. What is his role in this, and how is he in this film?
Yeah, so Sterling K. Brown actually plays a really interesting role in this film. Really quick, our cast for what's here is, like I said, we have Jeffrey Wright as Thelonious Ellison, or Monk as they call him in the film. Thelonious Monk, obviously a joke on writing. Tracy Ellis Ross plays his sister, Lisa Ellison, who's taking care of their mom, Leslie Uggams, who plays Agnes. And the brother, Sterling K. Brown, is our distant brother. He lives across the country. He is an oncologist, I think. His wife is not talking to him. His kids can't stand him. And he's just very recently come out as gay. And he has a lot of problems. He's got a lot of problems in this movie. And they just slowly become more apparent as we meet him. He actually flies into town over the course of the months where this film would take place. While it is a 2-hour feature, it takes place over long periods of time. He flies into town 3 times over the course of this movie. And he is struggling at home. And it's funny because Thelonious's odd fake story written by his ghostwriter character here, Staggar Lee, is stereotypical like hood rat stuff, man. Like it's about people living in the ghetto and struggling and shooting each other up, right? And having babies. And meanwhile, like the black stories that are actually in the film are about a struggling black writer and his brother, a struggling gay oncologist, like with a family who won't talk to him and is kind of struggling to find himself and figure out how to let people in. He's aggressive and he's over the top, but he's hilarious. Sterling K. Brown is wildly underrated in this feature. Obviously, he's getting his comeuppance with some awards buzz. Issa Rae, also a ton of fun, is Centaura Golden, this kind of opposing writer for Jeffrey Wright's Thelonious, this woman who's come in and written this story that he deems like terrible, right? He's like, oh God, how could you write that junk? Actually, even much better when a bit of the ways into the film, Thelonious is selected to be a judge on a panel of like an awards panel for best writing for the year, and he's placed opposite Centaura, and the two of them end up collaborating directly together on selecting works for the year that they think are worth mentioning. And they have a really, really fantastic scene towards the end where the two of them have this really frank conversation about, hey, how do you feel about writing something that like the culture sees as so wildly stereotypical? Like, is that okay? Like, what exactly are we perpetuating by putting these stories at the front? And is it okay to put these stories in front of an audience that believes them to be true, even if they're not, you know? Like, that's all really meaningful. And I think that plays really well alongside the very honest stories in the film of, again, struggling black writer, struggling gay oncologist, and also like Jeffrey Wright's mother in the film who's losing her memory. Like the family at home is like very much having their own problems. And like that plays opposite really well, like the kind of comedy stuff. It's just, again, feels a little disparate. Now, I should say it didn't work as well for me, but obviously it works for somebody. It's a Best Picture nom. Clearly a lot of people connected with this. And like I said, I think it's the kind of film I'm going to be thinking about when I'm older and maybe working through that stage of life with my parents, because it feels really sincere and really honest. I know director Cord Jefferson wrote the screenplay for this. So obviously they've got like a very direct connection with it. But I think like this cast manages to come together and really elevate the work. The problem is like the only really fun parts are the writing stuff, and there's almost not enough of it for me. Like that's the one thing. In a 2-hour runtime, like the trailer barely shows what 70% of the movie really is, like most trailers, I guess. But like it almost feels misaligned. Like they really wanted to show the fun stuff up front, and there's so much more going on here. Like there's such a more thoughtful conversation. Yeah.
So,
so
this has been nominated for several Academy Awards. Do you feel like it's kind of deserving, or it's earned those? Because like from the trailers, this looked like a movie that would come out in September. It's a safe, cheap, feel good thing.
Yeah.
Not big enough for summer. Not really Oscar baity material either.
It's a good question because I don't know. Like I guess best way to say this, I didn't know exactly what it was nominated for before I went in. I was driving to the theater and thinking, hey, I should probably look up what it's nominated for. And I thought, no. I'm going to watch the movie first. Then I'm going to come out. Then I'm going to check Oscar nominations. I was genuinely surprised to see it on Best Picture. Now, I know Best Picture gets up to 10 noms, like, so it's fine. I don't think it all worked for me and spoke to me in the way that it seems to have spoken to a lot of the members of the Academy. Like, I know it's kind of a broad category. Like, clearly it's worked. Like, somebody seems to really be into it. I didn't quite get over for me, but the stuff I did like, again, all of the writing content, like all of the publishing stuff, all of the struggles of being a writer who feels like their voice isn't heard and trying to have the confidence to continue working and working through writer's block. Like, all of that felt really meaningful. All of that felt really funny. All of that felt really whimsical. All that stuff in the trailer, all that stuff works great. The rest of it, I mean, shoot, like it must be good, right? Critics agree. Washington Post, that was the best picture of the year. They put it right there on the poster. So it's a surprise for me. That being said, soundtrack is understated. I should say that. Its composer is, I should have this down, and I don't. Who's our composer? Laura Cartman, notably the only female composer, like I said, on the list of best scores this year. While I don't know if it'll win best score, it's a good one. I was actually looking forward to Andy catching it at some point so we could talk about it. It's a good score, very different, very inventive. Otherwise, I don't know. Like it feels good to me, but it doesn't feel great.
What's the recommendation? What's the recommendation?
The recommendation. If you are a dry humorist, you like dry humor. You're somebody who likes New Yorker articles, right? Like you're somebody who likes to think of themselves as maybe a little high and mighty when it comes to the media they consume. I think this is the perfect picture for you because our lead, Jeffrey Wright's Thelonious, is exactly that person. He kind of sees himself not necessarily in an ivory tower, but a little bit above, I think, like the problems that so much of the people around him face. And it's humbling for him to have to go home and struggle with that with his family. And it's uniquely hilarious to see the publishing industry cast in such a harsh light because it is really funny, him dealing with his publicist who's like, come on, man, I know you think it's trash. Let's send it out anyway. Maybe it'll be a hit. And then when it is a hit, well, yeah, of course you think it's trash. But if other people like, like the ways we convince ourselves that like the art we produce is worthy, even though we don't see it ourselves, is really tremendous. And I think American Fiction has a lot to say that way. I think it's a great work by Cord Jefferson. I really enjoyed it. Honestly, I'd recommend. I do. I think I'd recommend American Fiction, but it's dry. It's dry, man. And that's okay. It's dry funny, but it's dry. So if you know what you're getting into and you're looking forward to it, I think American Fiction is worth your time. I don't know when it'll be coming to streaming services, but that's probably where I'd recommend it. Not exactly a cinematic masterpiece. You're not seeing sweeping vistas and insane camera lenses. And that's okay. Like, it doesn't have to be. I think it uses the medium of film to adapt the story from the book in a way that is uniquely satisfying. Jeffrey Wright's hilarious. Yeah, I'd recommend, I think. And that's American Fiction. I'm glad I got to see it, especially opposite Madame Webb, film that I was not super into. Now, we're going to talk about one more film this week on the podcast, a different mini review, a film Andy has seen and he's happy to report on. Andy, please take it away.
Nyad. So this is a Netflix release, came out a couple of months ago. It has a couple of Oscar nominations about marathon swimmer Diana Nyad, played by Annette Bening, and her best friend and coach, Bonnie Stoll, played by Jodie Foster. Diana Nyad was a marathon swimmer who had some incredible feats. She swam around Manhattan in like 24 hours. Like this, we're talking about extreme marathon swimming. She had 100 miles swim in the Caribbean. She did all this in her 20s. She attempted to swim from Cuba to Florida when she was 28. She got about a third of the way there, got knocked way off course, and had to stop the swim, and then promptly retired. So we catch up with her 30 years later. She's turned 60. She's a very difficult person. She rubs everyone the wrong way. She kind of is mean. She thinks everyone is underachieving and no one tries hard enough. And she just feels a little ennui with life, and she comes with a crazy idea. She wants to attempt this swim again. It's 110 miles in shark infested, jellyfish infested waters. You got to have the right current, right time of the year, right time. Everything's got to go right. And she wants to do it again. Her coach Bonnie, again played by Jodie Foster, is like, I don't know. You couldn't do it when you were 28. Can you really do it when you were 60? And so they set off on this adventure to attempt to complete this feat again, taking multiple attempts, putting together a team, because you got to have a boat. You got to kind of swim next to a boat the whole time to to follow along. You got to have some safety people to keep the sharks away, medical staff, all that sort of thing. You got to have a plan. You got to be, and it's like it's a 60-hour swim, 65-hour swim to do this, and so it's exhausting for everyone involved. This is the two Oscar nominations are for Best Actress and Supporting Actress for Annette Bening as Diana Nyad and Jodie Foster, who we've also just seen in True Detective Night Country, if you're watching that as well. I almost said that's our setup, Zach. What do you think? Zach has not seen this. The movie, it spends the money in weird places. You have an incredible performances by our leads, but then you got that Netflix cheapness that like some of the scenes, like you can tell you're indoors in a pool, you're not out on the ocean. Some weird CGI and screen. It's a little too long. It's a full 2 hours. You could probably cut 20 minutes from it. It's a little paint by number where, you know, our main character learns to be a nicer person, and she does work hard to overcome this. There's some personal demons to overcome as well. A lot of the water stuff is pretty cool. Apparently, Annette Bening was, you know, spending 8 hours in a pool every day to learn how to be a good swimmer. So it's fine. It reminds me of Zach's review of American Fiction, where it's really, this is getting, you know, this is why Margot Robbie wasn't nominated for Best Actress. This movie on Netflix that no one's seen. Also, I just read something that from, because I was doing research on Diana Nyad. This kind of takes the wind out of the sails. Her achievement was not ratified. She did. This is historical, so it's not a spoiler. She does manage to swim from Cuba to Florida, but her achievement was kind of stripped. It was not ratified. Guinness Book of World Records took away the achievement, mostly because there weren't enough kind of third-party independent witnesses for it. There were some conflicting reports. It just wasn't documented well enough to give it to her. So that's a little disconcerting, but it's still an incredible story. You know, it's about not giving up on your dreams. You know, she accomplishes something in her 60s which she could not do in her 20s, which is really inspiring. So that's kind of the film. It's inspiring. It's got a lot of positives. It's got a lot of cheese, and it's got a lot of bad effects in some places, particularly when a lot of the swimming scenes, a lot of, you know, there's stuff kind of happening underwater. Some of it looks great. It looks like National Geographic, and some of it, it's like, okay, you're in a bathtub, like pretending that there's a storm, kind of.
Well, that's actually a perfect opportunity for me to give you a chance to breathe and collect your thoughts. I wanted to ask about direction. The directors for this film, Jimmy Chin and Elizabeth Chai Vasarhelyi. Boy, it's a tough name. They are the directors of documentary features. They did The Rescue. They did Free Solo, which got nominated for Best Documentary just a couple of years ago, I think, about climbing the really big rock without any harnesses or safety or anything. Obviously, a nightmare to shoot. There's behind the scenes footage of that, of them figuring out how to film a guy climbing up a huge thing without any supports, and if that's even okay. In the documentary space, I think these creators are uniquely positioned. Like, they've done some really unique work, but now obviously they've transitioned into narrative with this feature. Giving it a watch, looking at it, maybe revisiting it with that lens. I think you nailed it really good. I think a lot of it probably looks like National Geographic, right? Like that. This is the stuff they do best. The stuff that doesn't work, I think, I wanted to ask, where do you think these directors maybe could use some improvement, or maybe was somewhere that you felt was weak that, looking back, maybe that could be, I don't know, could be attributed?
The documentary style stuff, when they're out in the ocean on the boat, where they're doing that open ocean swimming, that stuff looks great. You just got to stick to it the whole time, because you can tell, like, there's night scenes where you're in like some studio big, like, reservoir, or like they build studios for water when you need big water stuff, and it looks like it. You can tell the boat's not really moving. You're just like, oh, there's a storm, that kind of thing. It's too long. It's super Oscar baity, which I'm just really disappointed after seeing this, that Margot Robbie does not have that Oscar nomination, and Annette Bening does, because she Diana Nyad is not a character that's easy to like I said, she's very stubborn, she's very kind of cruel, she thinks everyone around her sucks, she's like, no one tries as hard as me, I'm the best, everyone is weak, I can, and that's part of her character's journey, and is learning to be a little bit more personable. It's fine. Jodie Foster's fine. She's good. She's good. It's not a standout for like, oh my gosh, that's the performance we need to award.
Yeah,
So the script could tighten up for sure.
I was going to say, like, I rarely see a performance by Foster or Benning that I don't enjoy. And looking at Foster as kind of the coach in this, I feel like maybe coming off True Detective, I'm a little warm on her for sure. Benning, like, I genuinely do not believe she could swim that whole distance. So, and I know it's a fantasy movie, and I get that. It's just a role. But seeing it on Netflix, it just gives it this sheen of fakery that I don't love. And so I wanted to ask about some of the hazards, right? Obviously, it's a dangerous journey. Jellyfish, sharks, all that stuff. Does it make for at least like a harrowing third act? Does that make for something particularly exciting? Does it pick up the pace, I guess? Or does it look as paint by numbers as maybe a cynic would feel looking at the trailer?
It is paint by number, but it does do it pretty well. It took her 5 attempts to successfully make this swim, so we see all 5, and so she fails for most of them. And the sharks are less of an issue as much as the jellyfish. The jellyfish are the huge problem because they don't really know how to keep them away from a long time. And like on one of the attempts, she nearly dies because she's basically attacked by jellyfish, and she starts having an allergic reaction to the medicine they give her. They got to pull her out of the boat, do CPR, and like there are some high stress moments, and it's also you can easily be blown off course. You have to have a good navigator that knows all about like the winds and the currents and can keep you. And that's part of what goes wrong is she gets blown way off course and in a couple of the attempts, and they just have to stop after 30-40 hours of attempting because it's like we're too far off, we can't get back, like we got to pull you out of the water. So there's that part of the drama I think works pretty well. The jellyfish stuff is particularly I mean they're all over her face and her body, like it's tough to watch. So that stuff is truly scary.
Boy, all right. Well, I mean that sounds pretty exciting. Like I dig that. And like, hey, who doesn't love a good sports training montage? I suppose it's time for recommendations. That's where I'm at. You've spoken on Oscar compatibility. I think hilarious thoughts. By the way, great takes. I'm a big fan. Your Margot Robbie standing goes very much appreciated on this side of the podcast. Andy, would you recommend Nyad?
If you're interested in it, if you're interested in this story, if in these characters, I definitely was, just because this had gotten a lot of Oscar buzz. It is fairly predictable. It is paint by number, but it's done pretty well. Part of it looks really good. Part of it looks really kind of rough and kind of got a lot of cheesy CGI in some ways. It is motivational to an extent. I kind of think it's weird when you have oh, look at these privileged white women overcoming their dreams to swim really far. But Diana Nyad is somewhat of a celebrity. She's been on Dancing with the Stars a couple of times. She's a motivational speaker, has written books and things like this. She was on CBS Wide World of Sports for a really long time. So if you're interested in the character and in the story, I'd say watch. But it's not like a must-watch, must-see, like something like The Zone of Interest or movies like that we've been talking about.
Shoot, I forgot to ask in there while I'm thinking about it. Do you think it would have played better in a theater? And why did Netflix not put it out if it's an Oscar contender?
I actually thought it would, because a lot of the stuff underwater, a lot of the big boat shots when they're out in the open ocean by themselves, a lot of that I thought would work really well on screen. There's a lot of night scenes which are really cool. In a way to keep her on track, they have this kind of this LED thing floating off the boat in the water that she tracks, and like that's an interesting thing, and there's a lot of interesting visuals around that. I think it would have worked pretty well on the big screen. But Netflix is staunchly against the theatrical release. They're essentially trying to kill theaters. They would very much like that for that to happen and for everyone to stay home and watch Netflix. So they are not supportive of the theatrical experience at all.
Certified Netflix hater, Dr. Draper. You heard it here first, folks. Now I'm kind of in the same boat. Netflix needs to put their stuff in theaters. Whatever Ryan Johnson's next movie is going to be is barely going to be in there. David Fincher's last film was barely in there. It's a big miss from Netflix on content strategy. Maybe that's why they lost their 7-year lead for films, huh? Like the guy running that whole department. We talked about that just a couple episodes ago. And if you want to hear that episode, you can go back and check out our catalog on Off Script Film Review with all of our stuff on YouTube and iTunes and everywhere else. But before we get to that, Andy, we got to wrap up the show. What are we watching next week?
So we're watching the kind of comedy caper called Drive Away Dolls, which is not a Coen Brothers movie, an Ethan Coen solo feature. It's 84 minutes, starring Margaret Qualley and Geraldine Viswanathan and Beanie Feldstein. It's a bit of a crime caper gone wrong. They're accidental criminals. It's kind of a road movie. Looks pretty funny. We're interested in seeing that. And then we're going to figure out something else to watch either on streaming or release. And upcoming, the Tenet, the re-release of Christopher Nolan's Tenet is this weekend as well. If you're interested in catching that back in theater in IMAX, I might try and steal away a screening of that. And of course, the week after, a week from Thursday, we're going to be catching Dune Part 2 on March, which it comes out March 1st. That's just an FYI release for those Dune heads. Looking forward to that. But next week, Drive Away Dolls and TBA.
Very excited about Dune 2. I might try to get on that Tenet screening with you. I saw you sent me something about that, and I've been a mess this week until I haven't gotten to it. But for what it's worth, I think Drive Away Dolls might be secretly good. It's less than feature length. It's only one of the Coen brothers, but something about it's got a Raising Arizona kind of manic comedy energy to it that I think might, maybe there's a chance. So I'm looking forward to talking about it next week or the week after on the show. And to stand by on the streaming thing, we'll find something good. We always do. If you want to keep up with what we're doing here on Off Script Film Review, the best way to do that is to subscribe to the show as you are listening or watching it right now. If you're watching us on Facebook, follow us on Facebook. If you see this clip on Twitter, follow us on Twitter. If you see us on Instagram, throw us a follow over there. And if we're on YouTube, where huge things are happening for the channel. We got individual reviews, clips, all kinds of things going on YouTube. You can subscribe to us there as well to get new videos delivered straight to you. Obviously, the audio version of the show has always and will always be available for our audio podcast listeners out there on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartMedia, wherever you're listening to us. That's where we are. And we'll be here next Tuesday, probably, to talk about Drive Away Dolls, and we'll definitely be here to talk about Dune and other films in the future. That big episode 250 is coming up. Andy and I have been down in the trenches, down in the lab, figuring out what we're going to do. We got big plans, I'm sure we have big plans, and we're looking forward to putting that together for you, and that's in the coming weeks. In the meantime, thank you for listening to Off Script Film Review. Thanks for listening, gang. We appreciate it. From all of us at Off Script Film Review. Well, hold on. I almost forgot. You can check out other content from us at our website, offscriptfilmreview.com, and you can email us correspondence, mail@offscriptfilmreview.com, right into the show. Tell us what you think. Tell us if Madam Webb is so bad it's good. Tell us if Sony needs to pivot. Let us know what you think about Nyad or American Fiction. Any other movies you got in mind. We love talking about movies. That's why we do it every week. So, from all of us at Off Script Film Review, the home of bold cinema, I'm Zach Lewis.
And I'm Dr. Draper.
Thanks for watching.